Alright everyone, it's time to directly address people who label themselves as liberal or left-leaning, democratic partisans, progressive. There are all sorts of different labels, kind of like looking at the right today. Are you alt-right? Are you alt-light? Are you a neocon, a traditionalist? Are you a monarchist? Whatever it happens to be. These people on the left, who I'm presuming generally wouldn't like my content, you should actually like my content. Yeah, you should be very appreciative of people who speak out against censorship. Here's a clue for you. Some of us are variously, depending on what the paradigm is, called a far leftist or a far rightist based on who happens to be in command at the time. During the time of the Iraq War, when I came out and I said, well, Bush is stupid, number one, and also corrupt. Although Cheney was more corrupt, Bush was just a puppet. I think that's fairly clear. The Iraq War was stupid. It was a dumb idea. It was a fool's errand. Censorship, which was sort of stemming from the Patriot Act, was a bad idea. Domestic surveillance was unconstitutional. The Patriot Act was dumb. When I pointed all these things out, I remember at the time a lot of people assumed that I was far left, that I must be a total Democratic partisan, and a pinko, like a commie or something like that. Like, oh, you're not patriotic because you don't want to see people blown up. You're not patriotic because you don't want the government rummaging through people's trash at night to find out whether they're loyal enough to George W. or something like that. Later on, as Obama took office and the paradigm flipped at the time, in the wake of 9/11 really it begins to shift. Certainly around the time of Hurricane Katrina it was already well underway because of the political situation. Around that time, people, it became the Democrats primarily that were continuing that same abuse. Obama did nothing to end the drone program. He did nothing to end domestic surveillance. He did nothing to end censorship, all of these things. In fact, he doubled down on them. He started attacking journalists. He started expanding the NSA's own surveillance apparatus. And so then all of a sudden, despite the fact that I was saying exactly the same thing, which is censorship is bad, proxy wars are bad, mass surveillance is unhelpful and unconstitutional, all of a sudden those became identified with being part of the far right. People started assuming I was a Tea Partier, that I was going to vote for Mitt Romney or something like that, which those are two mutually exclusive things. Mitt Romney was just a slightly less well-spoken, in all honesty, more pandering, boring version of Obama anyway, with an R after his name. Same friggin' thing. And now, of course, the left-wing paradigm has continued, and progressivism. And so still, disproportionately, those that are feeling the brunt of attempts at censorship and surveillance are on the right somewhere, or they consider themselves to be on the right. The label doesn't really have any real meaning because it's such a plethora of different actual ideologies that all masquerade as the... You've got neocons, how are they right-wing? They don't even want to really reduce the tax rate. You see the congressional Republicans, they're like, no, we're not going to touch the tax code. We rambled about it for 30 years, but now that we've got the capability, we're scared. We got cold feet all of a sudden. But people on the left at some point, I hope the progressives realize that these corporate firms that you're applauding right now for, oh, they fired James Damore for being an evil sexist. They're going to blacklist people who have wrong-think opinions. True 1984 mode. I hope you realize that the shoe will eventually be on the other foot. And these corporate firms tolerate you, but they don't like you. Your economic views are wildly out of step with what they want. You want to force more diversity on them. They just want to keep up the pretense of diversity. They're corporations. They don't care about the issue, really. They don't care. You pretending that they're the good guys when they censor those evil ideologies over there. My goodness, how gullible and taken in by corporate propaganda can you be? You're calling yourself a progressive or a leftist, and you're believing multinational corporate propaganda from groups that help to give user data to the Chinese government so that people can be prosecuted for having incorrect opinions over there. Which is exactly what Google and other similar services do. If they're open to these other countries, they're open in Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Russia and all these places, and when their governments request data and say, oh, we're going to slap, we're going to kick you out of the country basically and block your service if you don't do what we want, they bend over backwards. They don't care about diversity. They don't care about censoring authoritarian opinions. They are authoritarian in form. And there are some of us who argue against that in favor of more of a Wild West web and a Wild West world, really, in which people can do what they want. Now, how is that different from the arguments you yourselves make on something like people's bedroom habits? You say, well, no government or corporation or social order has the right to insinuate itself into people's personal sexual lives. Well, yeah, but I mean, a few decades ago, people expressing that view would have been heavily censored. They would have been blacklisted. Somebody saying back in the 90s, oh yeah, I support gay rights #1, they could get blacklisted. There was no recourse. There's nothing to prevent them from being blacklisted. Or somebody who was anti-war. It was dangerous to be anti-Iraq war at first, until it lost popularity. Those of us who spoke out against it very early on were at hazard. I was lucky that I was very young at the time. Of course, I wasn't doing it on the internet primarily for the first few years. It was just in the real world. I'm like, this seems like a bad idea. What the hell does Saddam have to do with 9/11? And by the way, we're not accomplishing anything. But within a couple of years, it became evident that it was an eternal occupation more than it was anything else, a corporate power grab. And at the time, people said, oh, that's a commie opinion, that's unpatriotic, you should be ashamed of yourself, blah, 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 you got to support our troops. It was never an issue. All of these weird, concocted moral arguments that people make, whether it's someone on the right aiming it at someone supposedly on the left, or somebody on the left supposedly aiming at somebody supposedly on the right, they're just artificial. They're concocted. They don't even have any relevance. When you sit there and applaud that people online would be censored, they got kicked off a crowdfunding platform, they got kicked off YouTube, they got kicked off Facebook, haha, this Twitter handle went down. You're basically digging your own graves. And when the time comes that same heavy-handed treatment is aimed towards a bunch of progressives, and to some degree it already is, if someone's really out there, they're like a green or democratic socialist, or aimed at other people within the general so-called left-wing lexicon, then people like myself, all of a sudden, you're going to consider us your best buddies, and we're no longer far right. Now we're on the right guy's side of history. And some people on the right will be calling us names. Like when I criticize Trump. I vote for Trump as an alternative to warmongering Hillary Clinton, and that was my real concern. That and her deplorables comment really, that was a low blow. It was unbecoming her. I vote for him. All of a sudden, a bunch of people who ultimately don't have that much in common with my viewpoint think I'm one of them, and people who ultimately I was trying to help, like in the anti-Iraq war era. I'm like, well, keep focused here. Proxy wars, corporate censorship, surveillance, bad. Those are bad things. They're no longer right or left. They're just authoritarian. All of a sudden, those people think I'm like a Nazi or something like that. That I must be a Bible thumper. I've had people assume that not only was I a super Trump fan, but that I must be like a diehard Christian. If they don't know anything about me, based on my arguments against censorship. What do these things have to do with one another? Absolutely nothing. So these people on the left, you're going to be begging for more people like me within another half-decade. You really are. By then, it'll probably be too late. These programs will be too advanced in their nature to ever be peeled back. It would require real revolutionary fervor. It would almost require that you all become a bunch of, I guess, libertarians or something. By then it'll be too late. Because when you seek to abuse other people in a representative system, and then they gain the ability to play the victim card, they tend to then rise up, usurp things, they take control, and they start using your own apparatus against you. And this has been the way it is. It's just like with the W era, and I warned people on the right at the time. And they didn't see. They were blind to this fact. Hey, W's laying the groundwork for you to be abused. Because all this domestic surveillance and police state stuff and censorship, at some point it's going to be aimed against you as well. The fact that you're sitting there laughing about how great W is right now isn't going to save you from that in the future. And they didn't learn their lesson. Now they're learning their lesson. They say, oh, well, now we're anti-censorship. We're anti-proxy war. To the point at which you got people that are getting labeled Nazis are the ones that are saying we shouldn't invade a bunch of third world nations. Does anybody realize why this is a monumental problem here when people have this weird artificial football team mentality. It's not reality. It's not real. That sort of overlap between partisanship, ideology, and stated ideology is so loose, so tenuous, so malleable. It's almost worthless. You shouldn't even call yourself like a liberal or a conservative. You shouldn't use any label. Just say what you believe in. Go strictly by a non-categorized ideology and get rid of all of these various labels. Like, I guess I use monarchist as the most loose term I can use, but that doesn't mean that I agree with everything someone else using the same label says. So, I mean, I don't even really use that most of the time. Sort of like with my spiritual beliefs. For a while I used the term generally pagan, but then I realized, well, I don't really agree with most of these other pagans on many issues. Why should I bother? You can't really fit me into a category. It's sort of the anti-category movement. It'd be so wonderful, because then it'd be harder to censor people when they're not using a bunch of dumbass labels for themselves. But keep churning ahead and keep trying to blackball people for having wrong-think opinions, and keep saying, oh, we need to censor people we disagree with, because then what you sow, you shall reap in due time. And when that happens, you're going to cry and say, oh, we're victims. No, it wasn't our fault. Somebody else was responsible. It'd be the same shit again that we had many years ago. It'll occur again. Don't worry. Don't worry yourself about it. It'll occur. That's about all. Peace out.